Hello, welcome to Black Men Speak. I'm your co-host, the J.R. Stewart.
And I'm your co-host, Tommy D. Duncan III. That is TD3. Jimmy, it is Wednesday night, September 28th, 2022, Jimmy. And if it is Wednesday night,
It's Black Men Speak. Let's give a big shout out to Liquid for providing our theme music. And if you haven't already, please like, share, and subscribe to this channel, either on YouTube, Facebook, Twitch. What's the other streaming service that we're on? Oh, Twitter. So, regardless of what platform it is, please hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, and spread the word as we try to grow the channel. Tom, it looks like you got another a collection of interesting guests. Why don't you introduce everyone and tell us what the topic is for tonight?
all right, folks, we're going to have an intriguing discussion tonight, Jimmy. We're going to have the talk. This is another
The talk, Tom.
Yeah, this is another D talk. This is not the birds and the bees. This
Okay.
is not dealing with what happens if you get stopped by the police. This is dealing with the conversation that we probably least likely to have when it comes to the inevitable, Jimmy. We know that nobody can cheat death.
That's
But
correct.
all that being said, we're going to talk about our elders and as they reach the winter season of their life, how we need to make sure that we are putting our arms and caring for them for everything that they have done in order to cut down the path that we stand on or that we walk through. And then we're going to talk about that transition because when our elders do become ancestors, Jimmy, we have to have a reconciliation of our responsibilities to make sure that their life was not lived in vain. So protecting their work, protecting their legacy, protecting their wealth, which becomes the legacy of our community. So I have three subject matter experts, all have very intriguing backgrounds. We're going to learn a little bit about each of them and what they do. And we're going to go ahead and get this conversation on and popping, protecting our elders and producing intergenerational wealth. We have one returning guest and two new guests that, quite frankly, I expect they're going to be back after tonight. We are going to start with Miss Erial Green, ladies first, who is a caretaker of our seniors, and she's going to share with us a little bit about who she is and what she does. We're going to next have Ray Hodges, who has been on before.
Ray, welcome back.
Wealth planning and wealth creation. And then we're going to have Mr. Andrew Dunlap, an attorney, who's going to wrap it up. So, Erial, let's start with you. Then we'll go to Ray, and then we'll go to Andrew.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for having me. My name's Erial Green, and I am a social worker out in Houston. I work with family caregivers, and what that is just a word to say that for people that need care, particularly older adults, I work with the family members to ensure that they are supported. So I often consult with them about a lot of different things related to end of life care, finances, legal, making sure that while they are here, they're able to receive the right care. And then also supporting the caregiver because it can be very overwhelming caring for an older adult, just not knowing all the resources that are out there. And so I help them along that journey. And a lot of times it does involve conversations about finances. And usually that's related to the care that they are able to receive or not able to receive. And a lot of times it's tough conversations because we look at, a lot of times of the planning or lack of planning. And so I'm kind of dealing with those type of issues and figuring out creative ways so that they can have care in their home for as long as they are around. So,
all right, perfect. All right, and talking about finances and that wealth creation, we next have Ray Hodges. Tell us about yourself, Ray.
Good evening. Good evening. Can you all hear me?
Yes, sir.
All right, perfect. I was over here playing with the settings on here. Well, my name is, as Tommy pointed out, my name is Ray Hodges of Ray Hodges Financial Group. I've been in the financial management space probably greater than 10 years, maybe close to 15 years. My focus is on helping folks position their retirement savings so that it lasts as long as possible. I usually focus in the fixed index annuity space, But we do a little bit in the long-term care space as well, showing people how to leverage annuities in order to pay for long-term care as well. Thanks, guys, for having me.
All right.
Okay.
And last but definitely not least, Andrew Dunlap.
Okay, hey, thanks for having me on, Tom. It's been a while since we've connected. I have been practicing law since 1977, 45 years. The primary focus of my practice over that time frame has been a trial lawyer. But in the last couple of years, I'm refocusing on estate planning. Estate planning is a group of tools that families can use to transfer wealth and protect assets. And my goal with my clients is to avoid as much as possible probate and guardianship. And there's reasons why we want to avoid that. Those are the two very difficult places that you want to be in when you're trying to transfer assets from one generation to another. So we kind of focus on trying to help families start early, not wait till their last few years or few days, but to have a plan in place so that when they transfer, that number one, they're in control, and two, the family has peace of mind.
Right.
Good deal. So we appreciate you all being here. Let's kind of start talking about, some of the foundation pieces, and each of course of you can contribute. But I'd like to start with Erial, because you spend your daily life working with our elders, and we appreciate and adore what you do, because you usually come into play when families aren't in a position or maybe unavailable at times, depending on work requirements, things of that nature, to take care of the elders in their family. But I'd like to start out by getting your perspective, your thoughts as to the role that you see elders playing in the Black family, in the Black community. And, even though because you're considered a millennial, correct, Erial?
Yes, I am. I am a millennial.
There you go. Tell us what you see changing in the 21st century, with the role of our elders. Start about, what the role that they play in our community, but then also see what you see changing in the 21st century.
Sure. So from my perspective, I see that we respect our elders, but I don't see the value. I don't see that we really value them in terms of wanting to care for them, or we live in a very youth-driven culture, and everybody is focused on, oh, I'm turning 30 or I'm turning 40, and it's always this dreaded thing. And so when you look at things like that and you see older people, you feel like, oh, well, maybe they've already lived their life. They don't have anything really to give. And so I don't see a lot of spaces where we are engaging with older adults. I see them very isolated. Well, you go to your senior center and we're going to go over here and do our thing. For me, I'm very much involved in working with older adults. And so as a millennial, I have a very unique perspective because it's my profession. But I don't feel like people my age are as engaged with older adults. They're often living their own lives, and they may go and visit their grandparents. They may, engage, but I don't see it as an exchange. I see it as okay, I'm gonna go see grandma for the holidays, and that's gonna be that. But there's not really a strong connection between generations. So that's what I see, and I hope that changes. I love working with older adults. I love talking to older people because I feel like they have a lot of wisdom. I want to hear their stories. I want them to tell me everything I need to do so I can live a better life. But I don't see that happening right now.
So Andrew, you can probably span 3 generations when it
Yep,
comes
I've been
to,
around. I've been around, brother.
so I mean, and then you're in the legal field, so you have a very distinct perspective on this. Well, what do you see? I mean, because you were around and kicking, of course, in the latter part of the 20th century, just like I was. And,
Right.
you know, now you're still kicking strong in the 21st century. And now you're seeing a third going on to a fourth generation. What are you seeing in terms of the traditional role of our elders? How is that changing, Yvonne?
There's especially here in Texas, there is I agree with Erial that there is a disconnect between generations. The boomers are kind of, which is my generation, are moving off the scene, and the Gen X's, the Millennials, are pursuing their own agenda, and there are a lot of problems that I see in my practice where the transition has not been effectuated, and so what happens is that families are losing property, they're losing assets because there's no plan in place, and then when the event occurs, say an elder passes away, then there's a lot of drama, chaos, confusion, and I see many families losing property that is scooped up by investors who then redo that property and take away those families' legacy. With regard to guardianship or care, such as what Erial talked about, there's also no plan in place. And a lot of the older people are suffering, but they don't get the care that they need. And so it's a double whammy, you know, where we're not taking care of that generation that is passing on, and the handoff between the generations in terms of wealth and property and things is broken.
Ray, what are your thoughts on this? Because I know you have, and you know, we've talked about a lot of things, including this, and I know you've seen a lot in your profession and personally as well. What are your thoughts on this subject in terms of our seniors and the role they played and what's happened?
I would agree with everything that's been said so far. You know, like you said, you and I had just had this discussion. You know, I've found from my own experience, especially in the life insurance space, which is an area where, as Brother Dunlap pointed out, there's another area where we're usually not, we haven't made, you know, appropriate plans, right? In those situations where we might lose, you know, an income or one of the breadwinners, you know, unexpectedly. What I have found is that dealing with the inevitable is really hard for a lot of our families. You know, there's a fear around dealing with something that is going to happen to us all. Now, I'll say this, and I think I shared this with you as well. Once you lose, you know, someone, I think that it's unfortunate that it happens this way. But once you lose someone, I think that people, in my experience, start to become a lot more open to that discussion. Like, a lot of people don't like to sit and talk about things that you and I have talked about. So what do you want played? You know, we'll logistically, what do you want played at your celebration of life? You know, who do you want invited? Who do you not want invited? That's outside of the financial things, right, that you and I talked about. Make sure your accounts, do you have transfer on death on all of your accounts, right? Have you named someone that account will be transferred to? You and I have also talked about things such as passwords, right? Do you have your passwords documented so that, you know, if and when something happens, people can access those accounts? The last thing I would say And I hope I'm probably off topic, but last thing I'd say is want to make sure that you have a beneficiary named on all of your accounts, right? People have retirement accounts where sometimes in their haste, they may have forgotten to designate a beneficiary. So you want to do some of those things. But
So,
mhm.
and you bring up very good points in terms of the infrastructure, in terms of transitioning, especially as our parents, grandparents get older. But I guess my question is this: African people have always been a communal people, very family oriented. From the time in which our ancestors were enslaved in this country, even though our families were broken apart, during Jim Crow, during civil rights, and then we kind of get to the latter half of the 20th century, and we have a lot of things going on in our country. You have integration, you have the women's lib, you have a lot of different things that begin to happen. But in structure, typically, we are a very communal people. How did we get here? I'm not saying that we're totally here, but how did we get here? Because usually in our community, and I can't say that we are not that way, but it looks like, from what I'm hearing, the reverence for our elders, the reverence, and really, in some case, the calling on our ancestors, in terms of maintaining family structure, in terms of maintaining family and communal wholeness. Are we there? How did we get there where we're losing that? We'll start with you, Erial, and then Ray, and then Andrew, if you'd like to
Yeah,
continue.
sure. Well, I think Ray brought up a good point is that we're here because we don't want to talk about the inevitable. So we don't want to talk about our mortality. So if you have the oldest person in your generation, they're likely going to be the first. They're likely going to pass before we do. And so if you don't want to think about your own mortality, you are going to push off having conversations about estate planning, beneficiaries, life insurance, because that is kind of end of life. And we don't like to talk about those things. So if you don't want to focus on your mortality, you're going to shift to focus on whatever it is that you can hold on to, which is your youth, which is, being young, being, free. And so you don't want to talk about those things. And so oftentimes, when I work with a client and they get dementia, the family, they go away because it's too hard to be around that person, because you kind of see the end. And so it's kind of out of sight, out of mind. So you don't want to have these conversations. That's what I see happening. I also see it's just a lack of communication. So again, it's a cultural thing. If you don't want to talk about death, then you're not going to have these conversations with your family. You're going to put them off. And then you get in a situation where somebody has passed away, and you don't know what their wishes are, or they're sick and you haven't had the conversation about, do you want life sustaining treatment or not, because you've avoided them, so you put them off. So that's what I'm seeing, as
Andrew,
the dis-
Andrew, let me ask you this. Does it come down to, because we're really maybe into a second generation, maybe, that had disposable income, that has access to resources, healthcare resources, a disposable income, that kind of thing, that it wasn't really, I don't want to say it wasn't an issue, but because we had lack of access to things that the rest of Americans had on the most part, it wasn't really a conversation that we had? Or is it something different in terms of what you see?
Well, I tend to agree with Ariel. I think it's some culture going on where there's resistance. There's resistance to planning. Okay. Um,
And has
and
it always been that way?
well, we've never had, like you said, we're only 50 years from actually first class citizenship. I mean, in 1968, the Civil Rights Act was passed. In 1964, this Voting Rights Act was passed. The landmark civil rights legislation. So that was only 54 years ago. So some of us were there before that happened, and so we don't have a template. We don't have a model of how to do this. And I would like to compare it to immigrants who come here. Now, I'm in a practice, and there's 3 other lawyers in that practice. They all serve immigrant communities. Okay, though one of the things that is very paramount in their practice is this estate planning. These people are not waiting until they're in their 80s and 90s. They're 30, 40, 50. The children of immigrants are the most affluent group in our country. They're more affluent than whites, okay?
Wow.
Because they studied America. They bought into the American dream. They bought into the opportunities. And within one generation, their children are now more affluent than whites who are trust fund babies. So we need education. We need to break away from the traditions of our past. In my generation, the boomer generation, we were told, get your education, and we did. And we're probably the most educated generation. We were the first generation of African Americans that were going out and getting not only bachelor's degrees, but advanced degrees, and professional degrees, and so forth. But we were not told how to generate wealth. And so we don't have a handoff. We don't have a 2-generation handoff yet. We don't have one generation handing off to another generation. So we don't have a model or a cultural template for us to do that. So that is probably where we need to start. Sure, we need to take care of the elders, but the millennials, the Gen X's, they need to start. This is where the transition will begin with them.
Jimmy, I know we've talked about this on multiple occasions in terms of the recent immigrants in this country that have gone out and, pretty much leaped over everyone who's in the U.S. right now. And I know you and I have talked specifically and had conversations, of course, about Asian immigrants, but you talk about Middle Eastern and other ones. And I know you've got an opinion on this. I wanted to get your thoughts on this.
Well, I agree with Andrew that that others look at our country and they see opportunities. So when they come here, they don't know they're not supposed to succeed. When you look at the Muslim group in Detroit, for instance, I would think that Muslims around 9/11 probably caused as much hell as black people normally did before 9/11. But that Muslim group in Detroit was able to prosper and grow in large sections of Detroit that was black populated is now Muslim populated and self-sustaining for the most part. I mean, they've done what we know to do, which is stick together, support each other, spend their money within their community, just like the Asian community does, just like the Hispanic community does. The only group that doesn't practice that, I mean, even white folks do the same, but the only group of folks that don't practice that formula is black people. We still
Correct.
spend 95% of our discretionary money with other people outside of our community, but non-black people. So as our money is going away from our communities, other communities are spending their money where they get the ripple effect where $1 comes in and it circulates 20, 30 times before $1 leaves. So $1 can create $30 of economic activity, whereas $1 of our money creates 5% of 5 cents of economic activity. So I agree with Andrew. It's an education process, and this generation of us, I say us, I don't know which group everyone's in, but I would say that the 40 to 60 group has pretty much failed because we've allowed young people in our community to dictate the terms on our development. We're looking at them to see where the culture is going to be going, and what do they know? So the people who have the wealth and the knowledge on how to get things done is us, but we don't speak up and we don't drive the we don't drive the direction of our development.
Ray, agree, disagree? Any thoughts on that?
No, I'll throw in something to this discussion around, our inability to do some of the things that Brother Dunlap and Brother Stewart mentioned that we need to do more of. Right, this handoff, and you two have heard me say this before, so forgive me if it's very redundant. Our community, our culture, has become really, really enthralled with consumption.
Yes.
And if you are a community that is driven by consumption, you can't accumulate anything. You'll never be able to, you won't have anything to pass on because you spent all of your income, any income that you could have amassed, you spend it, right? Because
that's true.
For a whole bunch of reasons, our community is very consumed with making sure everyone knows how well we're doing. If we contrast that with the other communities, we do see the younger immigrant communities buying into that, right? A lot of them are designer and brand driven, but for the most part, you'll see in those other communities this ability to sacrifice, and that's a word that our community in recent years has not really been willing to embrace.
So, Erial, I mean, you're a millennial, and we have a boomer, we have Gen X, we have a millennial here. What are your thoughts on this? I don't know if you're feeling some kind of way about this conversation, but you're in that stage where eventually the millennial generation will be getting the baton or the torch handed off to them. And I guess I'm really not talking to you specifically, but your peer group from a generational perspective. Are you kind of agreeing, or that's not what I'm seeing when it comes to what they're saying? We can't hear you. You're on mute. You're on mute still. Erial, you're on mute. If you can hear me.
She can't hear you.
Okay.
We got to hear from Erial.
Yeah, Erial, you're on mute. If you can hear me, we cannot hear you. We cannot hear you.
Put it in the chat window for her. I think she can see it.
Okay. Okay, let me see here. Oh, she
Private
can't
chat.
unmute. Okay, do this for us, Erial. If you cannot unmute, drop off and then jump back on. And then I don't think anyone muted you, but drop off and then come back on, and then we'll get what you have to say. I think that should probably reset.
Why now?
Okay, good job. All right, Jimmy. And by the way, since we are about halfway through, it might be a good time to go ahead and bring in our commercial.
Okay.
Oh, let's see if we can roll. That's a good idea, Tom.
I have a few of them every now and again. All right, we are back. Erial, we see you. Can we hear you?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. All right.
Yeah.
So what I was saying is, it's very hard for me to answer your question about, do I feel like can you repeat your question again? Because
It actually, it's coming from, well, the baseline is that, and it's the American way, we're very consumption oriented. And I guess part of it is as we're progressing from boomers to Gen X to the millennial generation, I guess the focus on consumerism, what Ray was speaking to earlier, what Andrew was speaking to earlier, comparing our community to immigrant communities who come in, they focus on building wealth. Jimmy makes a point, they see opportunities, which is probably all generations within our community. Immigrant groups see opportunity where we see lack thereof opportunity. What is the millennial generation seeing right now?
So I see it a little differently. I mean, yes, we are, very much consumers. But I also see, in terms of kind of supporting our own, like, Black owned businesses. So I have my own business. And so I see a shift in us becoming more aware of what it means to support other Black owned businesses and kind of keeping the dollar circulating. I also see a shift in how we're looking at money and investments and creating multiple streams of income. I think we're learning more, and I don't think that's necessarily as African Americans specifically, but I think a lot of people are becoming more aware of how to invest their money, how to invest their time and things. So I see the shift. I don't know how fast it's happening. I don't think that we're just consumers. I think we're also wising up and trying to educate ourselves, and figuring out, like, okay, this 9 to 5 thing may not really work out for me, so how can I make sure that I'm creating these multiple streams of income? How can I make sure I'm starting my own business? How can I make sure I'm supporting other fellow business owners? So I do see a shift happening. I don't think that we're just, spending all our money on bags and vacations and things like that. But we do like to treat ourselves. So
and especially if it's on social media, huh?
And also,
yeah, but
Erial,
I see, and I don't know if it's just the algorithm, but I do see a shift. I see both sides of it.
Gotcha.
but you
But
have
I
to
see a lot of
ask
people.
yourself. You have to ask yourself what circle you run in, because if you're in a bubble with people who are like-minded, like you, educated, professional people, and that's all you really see, then you can get a sort of a skewed view of the entire picture.
Right, I agree. I agree with you. Just like for me, I work with older adults. I'm thinking about my retirement. I'm 32 years old. I can guarantee you, my friends or people my age are not thinking about long-term care insurance. But the reason why I'm able to have those conversations and think that
Seeing
way
it
is
every day.
because I see people. So it's really hard for me to answer that question because I'm
Gotcha.
in a different
Right.
space, and so I don't want to generalize a particular group. I can only really speak for myself.
Well,
And
why don't we ask you this, and then we're going to transition to the other part of our topic. Given that you work daily, with folks who are in the last season of their lives, what are the most important lessons you've learned? And you're learning them earlier than most people would, because that's your daily life. What are the
Sure.
most important lessons that you learn and you like to convey to our listeners? And then we'll see if Ray and Andrew have any thoughts to share after you respond.
One, save your money.
And
Two,
we're
invest
talking
in.
specifically what you've learned from working with elders on a
What
daily.
have I learned
From
for, like,
working with, for what,
that I
what,
apply for myself? Or
well, that or not, but specifically, what have you learned that you might not have learned if you had not been working with our elders on a day-to-day basis?
so I've learned that you have different types of family and different types of responses to care. Different relationships kind of will kind of indicate how the dynamics roll, or how the involvement that the family might have. So, if there was strain, years and years ago, that typically shows up, in terms of, the care that one receives. Um, I've seen how the lack of planning, because so I work a lot with people that have dementia. So once you get a diagnosis of dementia, that's very expensive. And so at this point, people don't have the resources. So you've planned very well, or you've been able to invest, you have the money, or you really don't, and you're kind of in this middle gap. Um, so I've seen that that space and how they kind of struggle with making decisions because they're at a point where they need an extra amount of care and they just really cannot afford it. I've also seen caregivers having to leave the workforce. So Gen X caregivers or caregivers, adult children having to miss out on work or miss out on certain opportunities because they're having to care for their parents because they can't afford to put them somewhere. So those are just the kind of things that I have seen and I've been able to glean from. Um, so yeah,
Okay,
that's kind of where I'm at. I
gotcha.
see a lot.
Let's transition to the other segment, and that is not just protecting our elders and being cognizant of that, but we talk about the next stage as our elders become our ancestors, and we talk about the resources that they built, however large that may be, however small that may be, protecting the legacy, protecting what they built their life on, and ensuring that that continues to grow and manifest itself. I want to start with you, Ray, and then go to Andrew. What are the biggest decisions that are the most important decisions that you believe you have to have the talk about? What are the most important decisions that we have to make while we still have our elders with us? And then I'm going to also ask you that question, Andrew.
You mean from a financial perspective?
It doesn't have to be financial, but it could be. It doesn't have to be financial.
Well, when I think of the talk, I unfortunately have lost both of my parents. They have gone on to be with the ancestors, and kind of like I alluded to earlier, and there's the conversation you have to have is to cover all of those particulars that we don't necessarily want to talk about. From a financial perspective, you want to cover discussion around assets, and I'll leave the the more legality, the legal pieces of it. I'll leave that to Brother Dunlap, which is extremely important to have, legally the documents in place that you'll need. And I don't know if Brother Dunlap will cover like power of attorney and medical power of attorney and all that kind of stuff. Hopefully he will, but those are things that you'll need as well. But the personal conversation that I made reference to earlier is one that we all need to have, and we need to have it, sooner than later. The specifics of how you want to be remembered, everything down to songs you want played. I think you and I talked about this, Tommy. People you want invited, people you don't want invited, how you want your body to be handled. Do you want to be cremated? Do you want to open casket funeral? All those things have to be talked about, as difficult as they are. They need to be discussed. They need to be covered, and they need to be documented. They need to be documented.
What say you, Andrew?
Well, I don't think it has to be so morbid. I think that what we're trying to do here is we're trying to not be so concerned with, say, our mortality, but more with our legacy. And I think that when I see other groups in our culture, including Anglos, they're not concerned with the passing on. They're concerned with their passing on. They're concerned with passing on something to that next generation. And so we've pretty much lived in the present. We haven't accumulated the wealth that other groups have. We're behind. But I mean, even at the turn of the century, not last century, 1900s, there were lots of African Americans who owned land, and they were not able. They were cheated out of their land. There was some horrifying stories about how they lost land. But even now, in the South, there are families who own large parcels of land and have no plan. It's not producing anything. It's just sitting there, and they're just paying taxes on it. So I think that rather than to think about, my passing, the best thing I can do is to inspire the millennials to set in place things that will create wealth so that they can pass it on.
What does that look like?
Well, I think it starts with financial literacy. Financial literacy is where it starts. Knowing how to use your money. And there are millions of people in this country who are very wealthy. They know how to use, they go into the financial markets, they have stock portfolios, there's real estate investment trust, there's all these things. And you don't have to have a lot of money. And I know this is not my area of expertise. I know this is probably Ray's, but we have to understand the importance of how, if we just get a financial calculator and let's say I put away $1,000 a month for the next 10 years, what that could generate in the market. And then now you're talking about passing things on. So the most important generation, I think, is the millennials. The millennials. The boomers, they are, yes, we are in the sunset of our years. The cake is baked. And yes, they need to have some plan to pass on what they have. But what we as African Americans have to do, we go to church and we say, hey, we're looking for a move of God. Well, guess what? We are the move of God. Okay? We need to educate ourselves and empower ourselves so that we can accumulate this wealth. It can be done. And when we do that, because I see what these immigrants do. Like, for example, here in Dallas, there are this huge Hispanic community, probably maybe a couple of million Hispanics that live in Dallas. And about half of them don't even need to speak English. They don't need to speak English because they do business with each other. They're each other's landlords, they're each other's employers, and so forth. And yes, African Americans are the most manipulated, engineered group of people in the history of our nation because we had a system of laws and policies that held us back. So we never were able to achieve group economics, which is one of the key ways that we can create wealth among each other. But there are other ways. So we need to be on all fronts. And when we do that, we can rise. We can rise, and I believe that we're going to do that.
Good deal. Hey, I appreciate you sharing that. I want to acknowledge and thank a few folks who have joined us tonight. Of course, the winner, Brother Frederick B. Roberts. We appreciate you joining. Ms. A. Brown, thank you for joining. You joined last week. Ms. Marion Square, thank you for joining us. And Cairo Solutions, who actually has a question that I have written down. I'm glad that they brought it up. Cairo Solutions. They said, my mother is 87. My aunt is 89. And if I talk about property or anything related to death, I get pushback that's like, you just want my money, or worse, you're thinking of doing something to me. And that's real talk that, I'm pretty sure this is not an uncommon thing. Ray, Andrew, what are your thoughts on this? And this is a very, very sensitive conversation, and I totally get it. Ray, let's start with you.
Well, go ahead, Ray.
No, please. I'm
Okay.
anxious to hear your thoughts.
Well, I tell you what, that is, I have horror stories about that. I could tell you about what happens when that doesn't happen. Is that now the winner is going to be the sheriff? Okay, they're gonna lose the property. The elders who don't want to pass their property on to their children uh, no one's going to have that property. Okay.
True. Lawyers will.
The Dallas Land Bank. The Dallas Land Bank is a authority that's been set up to take the property that has been sold at sheriff sales, so that people can come in and buy that property and create affordable housing. But that's not what's happening. The gentrifiers are coming in, and they're getting the property for nothing.
Cheap.
And then they're turning it around, and they're making hundreds of thousands of dollars off of the property because of this very problem. I don't really know if we can really do anything about that. As a matter of fact, I am not a probate lawyer. If you are asking me, here's $10,000, and you have a choice of representing the family in the probate of a will, or you could dig this ditch, I'm going to ask for the shovel. Okay, it's not worth it. It's the drama, the family dynamics within the family over this kind of thing. It's just it never. And guess who's going to be blamed? It's going to be me, the lawyer. So what I focus on is that millennial group that we can start fresh with, okay, and get them going on the right path with respect to planning and not feeling like, because if you create an estate plan, you own that home, you live in that home your entire life, you control that trust, and it doesn't matter until you pass away. You can avoid probate. And so, yes, we have had that. It's a big stigma in our culture, that when you go to your parents and say, Mama, you need to make a will, she's thinking that you're trying to steal this from me. But yeah, it's a problem.
Let me ask
But
you
but Tom, if I may offer a suggestion for young people, if you're in that situation, if your parents or your elders don't want to leave a will, don't allow their estate to go into probate, because
what's the
everyone's going to
alternative?
everyone's going to lawyer up. The lawyer's going to, in the end, the lawyer's going to have to be paid. Um, the alternative to that, Tom, if you can't get someone to create a will, then offer to buy the property from them. If you can, you guys come together and make a cash offer, make some terms that you can live with and agree with to keep the property out of probate. So that way, when the person passes away, they can feel they'll know that their property's been handed over to their offspring, to their children or grandchildren, and it's in good hands. And they've generated some wealth while they're still alive. So it becomes a win-win situation.
Exactly.
Well, let me ask you this: Is it as simple as this? I know it's not as simple as this, but these are the options. Either when things happen, and they will, the government and the attorneys will get what you work for.
Yes.
They control the situation, or do you want to control the situation? And it's like, I may not have a dog in this hunt, but either you want to control what happens to your assets, it doesn't matter what that looks like, or you want the attorney and someone that you don't know. I think we have a call coming in, so let me see if we can get a call in. Hello, this is Black Men Speak, Tommy Duncan. If you could give us your name, where you're from, and what your question or your thought is.
Hi there. My name is Tanya, and I am from DeSoto. I've just come in on part of the conversation, and great conversation, by the way. But I wanted to know if anyone has given some examples of how to get your elderly parents or elderly loved ones that you're guardian over to want to go do some estate planning or talk about funeral planning, because a lot of times they're from the generation of they don't talk about certain things. So does anybody want to give tips on how to approach your elderly parents and how to get them to do it? I think that'll be most advantageous to those of us that are listening when your parents don't want to talk about it. I'll hang up and let you all answer. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, Tom, that's a tough sell when old people don't want to do it. So you can't twist their arms and force them into doing it. And then part of that is you got to keep in mind that these are people who work really hard to accumulate some wealth or some property or some assets, and they did it for with hard work. So if you approach them in a way that they acquired it, you may have a better chance as opposed to going to a professional. They feel that they have to sign paperwork they don't understand, a lot of legal talk, a lot of esoteric legal language that's over their head, and they feel that maybe I'm just signing my property away and I'm going to lose my property in the end. Everything I work for is going to be gone because I signed some document that I didn't understand.
Erial, you might be able to speak to this. I mean, you work with seniors every day, and I know you've come across this in several different ways. What are your thoughts?
Sure. Yeah. So
And
that's
this
a
is
very
the question from the caller. How do you talk to your elders who they may push back. They may not
sure.
want to.
Sure. Can y'all hear me okay?
Yeah.
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. So this is like a very personal conversation, and a way that I frame difficult conversations with families, particularly with older adults, is that one, I like to validate their feelings and their concerns. And then two, I frame it in a way of asking them what their wishes are. And once they begin to talk about that, I say, okay, this paperwork, we're just putting this in writing so that we're able to honor your wishes. So that way we take all of the guesswork out of it. And so that's typically how I frame most of my conversations with older adults is this is a way that we can honor you by putting this in writing so that when it's all said and done, you don't have to worry about people fighting over your resources. It's already kind of lined out. So mainly just framing it in the point of this is just a way that we can honor you and your wishes, and so that there's not a lot of confusion in the end. And it also saves a lot of money and a lot of time. And typically our elders care about us, and they care about, our feelings as well. And so if we frame the conversation of this is number one going to help you, and it's also going to help me, so it's a win-win situation. But I know that's not always, easy, but it's not a one-time conversation. It's a conversation
Yes.
that you often have to have over the course of months, possibly even years. And so I would start having that earlier, sooner than later.
Well, and another thought, because everybody's not in the same situation, and this could be a good idea or a bad idea, is having them consult with some of their peers who have been in situations that, whether they had family members who, predeceased them, to maybe get some guidance. And so if they, for instance, may not trust everybody in their family, they could talk to some of their peers about the same thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely think it should be someone that they trust. People tend to hear messages a little bit better from people that they value and that they trust. So
What about you? What are your thoughts on this?
TD, you talking to me?
Yeah. What are your thoughts on this, Ray, in terms of how to approach our elders who may be a little bit thorny on talking about this subject?
I think we could learn and really, if we were to implement what Erial suggested, as she said, this is very personal. I can use in my own example. My mom had not amassed a whole bunch of anything, and she was very suspect of the conversation. And we were able to get beyond it, but initially, and then someone already pointed out, it may take several several attempts, and then maybe you have to catch people when they're in the mood to talk about it. But eventually she did give in, and we did start having those conversations. But the only thing, and I think Erial it was her method, I think, would be effective, right? Hear them out, make sure that you can make them as comfortable as you can. But the other thing is also reminding them or encouraging them to think of how you're going to feel trying to lay this all out. I'm already going to be really, really in an emotional state, very hurt by what has happened. This will make things a little smoother, after the fact. So that's the only thing that I can think of, because at the end of the day, as you already pointed out, that elder has to has to come to grips with that and has to accept it. You can't force them to accept it.
Gotcha. I have a couple of comments that I want to acknowledge here. Mr. V, Vincent Stokes, having proper amount of life insurance is important to covering expenses and passing on assets to the next generation. And so therein lies the question, okay, where are your insurance papers at? Because that is not a foregone conclusion. One, that you have it, and two, if they're kind of prickly on having the conversation, when they do transition into ancestor status, where's the documentation? So thank you for joining Mr. V. We have Kairos Solutions Group. Has to be a third party that is trusted. Yep, that's good. Yes, good. Ms. A. Brown, there are 25 ways to say something. Approach, to your point, Erial, is everything on this topic. How you approach the issue. And then also from Kairos Solutions, been to a couple of funerals that the kids actually got into a fight. Yeah, this is not uncommon, unfortunately. And if you don't know what and how to honor the life's work of your elders, then unfortunately those things can happen. We have a couple of minutes left. Let's talk very briefly about, we talked about model, we talked about systems to put into place. Let's kind of dig into that very briefly, and then we'll wrap it up. And we're going to have a part two to this conversation because we're getting warmed up. It's getting good, but we're almost
maybe
at
in part three.
Exactly. So let's talk about at least getting started with having the right structure, the right model in place. We'll start with you, Andrew, then Ray, and then Erial. We'll have you round out.
Well, what I said previously is estate planning is when you create a family trust, okay? And you put the important assets in the trust during the person's life. There's two types of trust. There's a revocable trust and an irrevocable trust. Most people are put in a revocable trust, so that person has control. They can revoke that trust at any time during their lifetime. If they own a home, they have possession of that home during their lifetime. They have control over all of their financial tools, but at the same time, you have backup. You have a backup trustee. They have a durable power of attorney, physician's directive, all the things that helps the family in the case of a need for guardianship, because guardianship is a very difficult thing to get through the legal process. So what we try to do is we try to avoid both the probate and the guardianship. And what we're selling to the family is peace of mind. Everybody knows what's going to happen. There's peace of mind. The trustor, the person that's making the trust, is still in control.
There to go. It's a good plan.
And what is that, like a fixed cost on one of those trusts, or is it a percentage of assets? How does that work?
We do, in most cases, a fixed cost on the revocable trust. If it's an irrevocable trust, then there's retainer plus the time needed to construct the trust. We don't do it on a percentage of assets. No. Okay,
good deal. All right, Ray, what are your thoughts?
I saw a reference to life insurance. That's something that we need to have in place. We've talked about, leaving a legacy. It's the least expensive way to set up an estate for your family. And, you can sit down with a life insurance agent that, comes highly, referred, but you want to sit down with a life insurance agent to do a needs analysis. So you make sure that maybe make sure you have enough to cover your family home, maybe have 6 months if you can afford it, in addition to having enough to cover your home's 6 months expenses, because those family members are going to have to try to adjust, right? Especially if you were the breadwinner, they're gonna have to adjust emotionally, and they're gonna have to adjust financially. And so whatever you can do ahead of time to prepare for those things, you're only going to help your family in the long run.
Right, exactly.
So key, at least 6 months, a year in terms of expenditures, responsibilities, so that as they go through this transition period, bereavement, etc., they don't have that additional stress of financial loss as well.
Absolutely.
Okay, Erial, what are your thoughts?
This has been great, by the way. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I would just add, have conversations with your family. Start early. Just have just general conversations. What do you think about this? Or a lot of times I see examples and things like on TV, movies, and things like that. They're a great way to just have general conversations with our family, but just start talking to one another. And use that as an opportunity to just build upon everybody's strengths, and validate everybody's feelings. So just open the door for communication is the biggest thing in this situation.
All right, and start early.
Start early.
Yeah.
Start young.
Start early.
It's interesting you bring that up because my dad is very much on top of his paperwork. But when it came down to, and my dad is going to live for the next 100 years, even though he's not a spring chicken anymore. But I asked him about, well, Pop, and my dad is a singer, and I was like, well, Pop, who would you want to do the eulogy? Because his old pastor is gone now. Who would you want to sing? Because he's a singer. And so I had to ask him, who would you want to sing
That's
it?
important.
He would have a very specific request because he is a singer. So pay the attention to detail.
Yeah. Ask and listen, like I asked my friend, we were talking about funerals, and I told her, I said, look, this is a picture I want, this is what I want y'all to do afterwards. And she was like, this is so morbid. And then we start talking about who she wouldn't want at her funeral and all this kind of stuff. And it felt very weird to have these conversations, but at least y'all know, like, whatever y'all decide to do is y'all business, but at least I told you what I want.
I told my family I didn't want anybody getting up talking about the good things I did, because I know so many lawyers and so many judges that the opposing side would want to bring up the dirt on me. So let's not make it a judicial proceeding. Just let me go on. And, we'll leave that alone.
If you open that door, you open it to a cross-examination now. So
yeah. The other thing I also want to add is make sure that we're giving each other our flowers while we're here and having these conversations, because a lot of times people will get up at the funeral, they have 2 minutes to talk about everything, and it's like they're gone. Like, tell them while they are here how much they mean to you. Absolutely. And that's, I feel like, how you could start the conversation about legacy and about thanking them and honoring them. That's a great way to have that conversation, is just honoring them now in the present,
exactly,
not in the future.
That's right.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, guys and ladies, it's been great. We need to have everybody back. Like I said, like Tommy said, maybe have a part 2 of this conversation, maybe even 4 or 5. I don't know if 1 hour is enough time to thoroughly vet out this issue. So if everybody will hold tight while we close out the show, and we can finish up after show discussion.
Before you go, Tommy,